How's it going?
Good, we're going.
Do we want this closer down? Or it's okay this way?
I think it's okay.
Is that visible?
No?
I feel like that line would change.
I don't have to. Yeah, it's just like it's there, and so like as long as the teachers are working, it's only pressure like teachers.
Well, this is.
Yeah, I've done pretty much kindergarten. 5 years.
Oh, you know, I made a shot. I think
Yeah, some Ghana.
Really, Chef? Yeah.
So it was like, oh, where? Source is a great part.
That is what they say. Oh, yeah.
For a lot less than we were trying to China. And then. I think how much I like.
Oh, I can't believe Jessica just.
I mean, this says you.
Oh.
Yeah,
but I got the same,
yeah.
I mean, yeah. And I had some. So what do we go? Thank you, Jules. Yeah. Should we just go?
Yeah.
I get to see. In here? Yeah.
We should probably
Place the
take this one off.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, they're both such lightweights. Yes, yeah. They keep us protected.
So I'm just trying to. No, we're fine. We got that from the south. And my brother, because we just. And then we need so flew to New Orleans, flew to Tucson, and then drove to Tucson.
How long were you there?
You know, so.
We make a comment. So, yeah, no doubt.
Well, we should.
He likes, two Aries. You know, that's.
I think the
The one with mugs.
I know.
Hey everybody, I think we're gonna get started. I'm Anna and it's Levi, we're both staff at Member Research. Thanks for coming tonight. So these projects are, our artist-instigated discussion series that happen once a month, and they happen here at Kidney Dance. We're so thankful that they host us for this series every month. We are audio recording and live streaming this tonight, so that it can reach a broader audience both right now and after the fact. So if you don't mind speaking up, then we greatly appreciate it. And a couple other things. The elevator in this building does stop running at 8. So if you need the elevator to exit, we'll make a little announcement around 7:45 to remind you. There's many stairs to get to the bottom. We're selling a little bit of merch here tonight. We have some tote bags, both our red tote bag and our black tote bag. If you want to see Racy, who's standing over there, or me afterwards. And we have our performance journal number 45 and our brand new winter spring calendars that started just a couple days ago. Also, this is a free event. If you're able to throw a couple dollars in the vase at the end, we greatly appreciate it to keep things free and open to the public. And I will turn it over to Diana.
Thanks you guys for coming. And thank you to Movement Research for letting us do this and hosting it. I have a couple of different hats that I'm sort of taking off for the night, but I'll give you just some context on myself. I work at Movement Research as the manager of the Dance Makers in the Schools program. So it's a small program. We're in about 7 different schools, and we partner with each school to do a really specific project that works for those teachers and the artists that we have working there. So that's one of the hats I have on, and then I also work as a teaching artist a little bit. So I've been sort of one foot in arts and education since I was in college, and feel like I have been sort of inundated with standards coming from the federal government and state government, city agencies, and also different curriculums, templates, mission statements that I've gotten for the different nonprofits that I've been working for. And some of those standards or curriculums have been terrible, and some of them have been great. But what I have not really experienced is a lot of dialogue with my peers who are teaching artists. And I would say there are probably like hundreds of dancers teaching in schools right now, and I know very few of them. Well, I probably know a lot more than I think I know. I just don't even know who's teaching. It's sort of this like ubiquitous way to, not ubiquitous, but almost ubiquitous way to make a living in New York. But we don't ever talk about it. And we don't have a lot of dialogue among ourselves. So I wanted to do this discussion, and I wanted to hear from some people who are working in the field about what they're doing outside of the constraints of like an organization or a government-funded event. I just wanted to hear what they're doing. So I invited these 5 lovely people to join me, who are all incredibly great artists and teachers. And I wanted to focus the conversation specifically on teaching artists in the public schools, I think it's a really specific thing. And it's, you know, you have the huge school system, and then you have the huge like nonprofit world. And then there's this one person that sort of goes in between and is like standing in the classroom trying to navigate these two spheres. And so I think that's a really important role, and it's a really tricky one, and it balances all the things we do that we talk about in terms of like creating and performing and teaching, but really like you're just standing there in the classroom with all of this experience behind you and all of these practices with you and figuring out what to do in the moment. So that's a really unique position, and we don't talk about it enough, I think, from just the experience of teaching. So that's why they're all here. I thought we would start just with like a really utopic question. And I wanted to know what these guys are doing when they go into a school, like what do they want, what are their goals? So we're gonna come to context later, but we're gonna try this experiment if we can talk about our goals without talking about context. So lovely Jules Skloot has volunteered to talk first. And Jules has been sort of balancing teaching and creating and performing throughout his career, and has worked in the public schools through nonprofits and is now working at a private school primarily.
Thanks. So my goals when I'm walking into teach are initially and primarily to be a friendly, safe adult presence, and to communicate that to my students over and over, to let them know that I respect them and that I will never humiliate them, and that the room that we're in is not a place where it's okay for anybody to be humiliated. I feel like that goes into context, but stick with goals. To invite them into what I feel like is a birthright for humans, to let them know that dance is something that humans all over the world do in different contexts, and have done for a really, really long time, and to share that it's exciting and that they get to be a part of it. Because I often work with very, very young people, just to model how we can be in a room together and share the space safely and respectfully. They're just learning how to share and sit still for a moment before then they get to go off and move all around. So those are some basics. To work on improvisation, which I think is something that we do all the time in and out of a dance context. It's the way that we respond flexibly to our changing environment around us, and to set up dance as a way to practice that. To really connect them to the natural world, seasons, animals, plants, and also the city, around the movement of the city around them, to bring what they experience of the world around them into their bodies, and to notice that those things are connected and actually are the same thing. I think that's good for broad strokes and visual goals.
Next year is Randy Luna. Randy grew up on the Lower East Side dancing, and then kind of spread from there in terms of dancing and teaching and choreographing, and is now more recently getting into a design career pathway.
So I won't get into context because I know I can go in. I've done like just bulletproof pretty much in topics. So one is diversity when I go in. Because of the schools, I've been working mainly a lot in the Lower East Side. So the community, as far as the neighborhood, some of the kids are stuck in a certain box, and that's as far as going elsewhere and knowing history, knowing cultures. So diversity is one, so I won't go. Individuality, I feel like a lot of them also are contained even by the counselors in after schools, you know, because they're also in a certain box, so they bring that onto the kids. Adaptability, when I'm teaching dance, I do want the kids to think out of the box, think quick on their feet. It's just a natural thing that we do as New Yorkers. It's a natural talent that most of us possess. Discipline, just aside from the actual dance, which is a discipline, just discipline coming in, how you treat people, how you treat the space, what dance is, what the stage is. Expression is a big one. How you express yourself, how you conduct yourself, what are the boundaries of expressing yourself, and how you can do it in a safe environment. And communication, the right way of communicating. How do you communicate through dance? But most of all, for me, one of the goals is also learning from students. It's just not me teaching. And that's where a lot of adaptability for me as a teacher comes in. I even if I have a lesson plan, I'm open to what's happening at the current time. I like to bring current situations since I perform and since I'm connected a lot in the fashion world. Whatever I'm doing, whatever artists I'm working with, I like to bring that in so the kids know that this is real life, this is what's happening. How can you connect this to all the different dance forms or whatever it is that we're doing specifically, just so they can create, improvise, and be artists. So one of my goals is definitely also treating them equally as artists.
Great. Donna Costello is on the end here. And Donna too is, I mean, I feel like everyone's just balancing this performing and choreographing and teaching, working for several different nonprofit organizations at the same time.
We were saying that it's getting whittled down as you're going. But yeah, goals that I have is entering and creating a safe and supportive environment, and that I'm establishing a community in some way. And part of it is meeting whoever's in the room where they're at and also being responsive to who's in the room. So I think that echoes a lot with what Randy and Jules are saying. My goals is for them to find a presence in their body, and to know that the body is a vehicle of expression. And so then we get into self-expression and that idea of finding focus and intention behind that expression. It invites them into the world of the art form of dance. And that dance choreography is a way to express themselves. And then with that, I feel like when they're present in their body and expressing themselves, there's that idea of their identity, then they're being present to those in the room, in their community, and the world around them. So that's all getting like tied in somehow magically. And that if we go into, like, I do want them to understand the body, and if I had to break down what I teach, I would say I start with the developmental stages that we all did, kind of similar with what Jules was saying with birthright. Like, we all went through certain developmental stages, so it's a way in for everyone. And then I just think of layering that or adding to that depending on context. And that, again, I look at them as an artist, but I really am trying to teach to a totality of an artist, which means performer, creator, observer, improviser, critic, questioner, or collaborator. So that at any age, those are what I'm trying to tap into.
And now we have Lynn Brown as well. And Lynn has kind of followed the trajectory of being a performer and then going into making and now teaching. And I think probably out of anyone, you're like full-time teaching artist now, right? Yeah.
I think my first two goals are to be real and authentic. I'm in a pretty It can be a very turbulent environment I can be in. The kids I'm working with are coming from very turbulent places. It's New York after all. And so every day is, every moment's a little bit of a check-in. As they enter the room, you know, I need to center myself right away. I need to read quickly where they are, who looks like they didn't get any sleep, who looks like they might be hungry, who's bouncing off the walls today, who's got a grin on their face, who's talking to who, you know, and so, and be real and authentic about asking them to focus their attention without jarring them. So I want to be real and authentic. I want to encourage, I want to empower them to make meaning in their lives. I want them to learn how to invest something in their learning and their thinking and the people around them, the space around them, to imbue things with meaning. So I'm after, that's a big fish that I'm trying to fry. I want them to, I want to nurture habits in them. I want to try to transfer some of the things that dancers do, the way we notice, the way we're aware, the quick decisions we make to do this or do that, and what are the repercussions. And when we watch as an audience member, how we observe. I want to imbue, I want to help them nurture the habits of looking more deeply, of analyzing things a little more sharply, and hopefully give them the tools that they can start to make multiple meanings, multiple interpretations, broaden what they draw from the world around them, rather than quick, put it in a box, identify it, tag it, put it away. So I think that's it for now.
And last but not least, Miss Jessica Nickel, who also has been balancing this performing and choreographing and teaching all together, and is now mostly in terms of teaching, doing teaching the teachers, the professional development stuff.
So everything they said.
So trouble with going last.
And I think being an artist and stepping into a school, for me to recognize that the school exists, it is a community, it is a culture, I have come into it. And the importance of recognizing who is there and what have they brought with them. That I'm not coming in to tell you how to do it, I'm there to enter that space with you. And everybody has talked about this in different ways. But it's, you know, teaching for me is a lot more listening than it is telling. And how do you actually live that? What are the practices that you do to actually make those statements of respect? What are your practices that will keep renewing themselves? Because I think this learning, which everybody has spoken of, I think that you're learning as a teacher and your students are learning. And I think often what you're responding to, Diana, and your feeling about these pressures from outside, these external pressures, that in the world of education, I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to talk about context.
It's all right, we're going
It
there.
intersects with my goals so deeply. I mean, and it's an integrated whole. And I think part of what happens is everyone in that community that you're entering into is an artist. They walk in the room an artist. And if you believe that, then you have to ask yourself, how am I witnessing that? How am I making the space for that individual artistry to come engage with other individual artistries? And I include teachers in this because for me, deeply, teaching is a performing art. And my life was changed by a book called Teaching as a Performing Art. And it flipped my head around about what I was assuming about teaching, what I was assuming about teachers. And because we give each other names, like classroom teacher, which is the weirdest name. I mean, maybe we should be called studio teachers or something, but like, they're teachers, and teachers know they are artists. And if they don't always know it immediately, but I had a bunch of classroom teachers last Friday where I said, you know, teaching is an art and it is a performing art. And instantly their eyes just lit and they went, you know, it absolutely is. So I can't come in with my assumption that I am the artist walking into this room. I'm walking in and we are making art together. That includes the teachers, that includes the students. And then how do I stay responsive and spontaneous in that moment I think Randy said it, I think you said it, this thing about being in the moment and making those choices. How do you actually do that when there are so many pressures that work against doing that? And how do you enliven the teacher's power to do it for themselves and those students? And I think a lot of this has to do with power. And how do we, and you know, when we're talking about respect, Jules, in that environment where no one is humiliated, it is about how do we share the power? Because you have the authority to establish that, but then how do you share it and how do you balance that out? So everybody is a giver in that situation. Did I say what my goals were? To achieve all of that.
Great. Cool. So yeah, we were talking a little bit before this about too, like these goals. I mean, I'm just, these verbs that you guys are using, like to be free, to be safe, to empower, to express, to adapt, to think out, or go outside of a box, to analyze, to look, to be an artist, to respect, to share. They're all life skills. I mean, we could be talking about dance or we could be talking about life. And I wonder, a question I have is how specific is that to New York City public schools? Like if we were somewhere else, would this be a different conversation? But I want to invite you guys now to kind of fill in where you're coming from and why those are, where these goals have come from, or what kind of situations you're in that they speak to you. So maybe let's just go on and say more.
Where these goals come from.
Yeah, or like, what's your context? Like, what? Say all the things you wanted to say before.
I think for me, it's the context that I'm seeing as a person every day is oppression. I get what you're saying about like power and where's the power that, and to be a dancer, a person who's like also fighting every day to like assert my space as an artist and the dignity of my own body and the knowledge of my own body. So that's where I think that's where everything comes from for me. And that some bodies are told that they're better than others. Some people are told that they can dance, and some people are told that they can't. Some people, for some people, the message is that like art is a luxury, and so I'm thinking about like classism and sexism and racism, that boys can do certain movements and girls can do certain movements. So all of these things are, I think, get soaked so deeply into our bodies. And then our schools are soaked with them too. So always, that's where I'm coming from. Is dance is a way to be free from that. That's hard.
I think for me, as far as my goals, it comes from my background, my actual arts training. I grew up first in taking musical theater, and I took it actually at a quote unquote late age, according to the standards of being a dancer or an actor. And then it went into, from musical theater, it went into acting, and then it went into dancing, and just kept evolving. But my goals are the training and the appreciation of what the arts is. I think that's lost for me personally when I go, and not all schools, because there's some fabulous schools with great, curriculums and standards of the arts. And I'm speaking from the experience of the schools that I've been going to lately. I think they've lost what the arts is. It's so stuck on paperwork and stuck on terms and philosophy rather than the actual art. So that's where my goals come from.
Gosh, it's my turn. I mean, it's hard to say. like where it comes from, but it obviously comes from a personal experience of my experience with dance as an art form. And I think growing up, it was my way of communicating. I didn't know how to express myself, and yet I found it through this other medium, where my brothers had more of this academic, way. It was a community. It was very separate. Like I didn't have that community at my school. It was this place, and this sense of feeling empowered in the body. And so I think all of those, that idea of communication, expression, community, and this feeling that you have power, and that we all have it because we all have this thing, I think might be where it started. And I have to say that through the years of the experience that I am taking now from Maxine Green, that says the possibility to imagine and imagination, in terms of then you can imagine something different, you can imagine change. And so then just that idea of wanting to get them to imagine, but I think you need to create all that other thing first. Like you have to have the community, you have to know who you're talking to, you have to, for them to open up. And that idea of, as an artist, I found such joy in vulnerability. And how can you want young people that there's power in that. It doesn't. So I think all of those things then, after all the years, you figure out and you learn from each other and of how to kind of put that all together. So I don't know if that makes sense. And then I just want to say one thing about context is, I think this idea of collaboration is so huge, because I work with lots of different organizations in different settings, and it's really that I keep my goals and my ideas, of course, and who I am as an artist. As Lynn has said, you can't take that away. I'm going in as who I am as an artist. But there is a collaboration, because there are, I don't want to use the term again, but there are the other teachers, and there's and not only are you responsive, not only are you collaborating exactly as Randy said, with what's happening in the room with the students, but you're collaborating with the teachers, you're collaborating with the paras, you're collaborating with the principals, you're collaborating with your organization, you're collaborating with the facilities person because you need to mop the floor or something. So this idea of adaptability and flexibility, they're seeing me use it as well, and I really love that exchange. Like when we get kicked out of a room and everyone's like, oh, I'm like, we're flexible, we're adaptable, we can handle this, and that idea of that we do that as artists. Like, how many times do you show up in rehearsal and you don't have the space you thought you had, or this happened, or the show, the venue you're supposed to perform in gets canceled, and it's the same. We're living a similar world, and we're showing that you can work and you can find joy or meaning, and so I think this linkage to that, whether they're going to be artists or not, is really important, and that's where they stem from.
Wow.
It's big.
It's big.
It's really big.
Really big.
Yeah.
Jules' word. Jules' word, the respect for space and others, that's resonating with me quite a bit. And Randy's talking about students being in a box, and that's really resonating with me. And this idea of being vulnerable. And do any of you? Okay, I was in the car Sunday night. Who is it? Tippett. She's on.
Oh yeah,
NPR. Yeah. The last one. I don't know who she was talking to, but they were talking about the woman she was talking
vulnerability.
about vulnerability.
It was Brenna Brown.
Brenna Brown. Okay, so I got to go check out more of this woman.
Yeah,
vulnerability. Because she said something about an act of heroism wasn't possible without vulnerability, and this idea of oppression. And being in a box and being vulnerable, that I really hope that if I behave like an artist, because I think artists are very heroic people, I hope that if I behave like an artist, I can be a little bit of a role model. And hopefully I can provoke a little bit of vulnerability among my students if I show vulnerability, and hopefully build on that so that they can arm themselves how they want to be armed. That sounds so militaristic. But how to enable themselves to do what they want to do. And so that's a really big goal. I'm also one of those other people now. I mean, I almost view myself like a classroom teacher because I'm actually embedded in 9th grade ELA classrooms in 2 high schools. I go 4 days a week, 2 days in each school. I see the same kids in ELA all year long, and I don't always teach to dance or theater or work of art, though that's where I think the juice lies. What it means to be an actor, what it means to be a dancer. You start to get into that, and that's like where I live. But I'm also there to, my goals emerge from, I am expected to be a partner with my fellow teachers and with my students in pointing out that, hey, you know, when you compose a dance, it's kind of like composing a picture. It's kind of like composing your day. It's kind of like composing your life. What's now, you know, making these connections. So I'm one of those. I'm one of those other teachers now as well, which is a very new experience to me, as this is my 4th year in this role. And maybe in 4 more years, I might have a hint about what it is I'm doing now. But I'm trying to find my way through it. And so that's where those goals, I think, come from.
What is the ELA? What is that?
I'm sorry, English Language Arts. English Language Arts, reading and writing.
Okay. There's too many thoughts going on at once. But I think one of the things that I recognize is how many assumptions we make and how we don't know what assumptions we're making. That's what makes them assumptions. And so language is really important to me, and there are ways that we slide into the language that is not our art language as a way of fitting in. And so I'll give an example, which is the name of this session, which has K-12 is in the title. It means nothing to me. I talk about schools. Schools mean something to me because they are that place, that community, that culture. It's a space, it's a real physical space. K-12 for me is a definition of age groups, levels that have been determined by a system that is already categorized, and it's a shorthand. So that anybody who's outside of it, it's sort of like the ELA thing, K-12 could be like those K-9 bands or something. I mean, it's just it's that language. And so for me to check that, and I go, why, you know, I saw the title and I went, what is that? What does that mean? And it also distances us from each other as people who teach in studios, people who teach in colleges, people who teach in the world, you know. So I want to check language, and a lot of the assumptions are embedded in those languages. And I think a lot of those languages are system languages. And one of the things that I've always felt is I want to stay inside the community and outside the system. And that's just who I am. I'm so thankful there are people who can handle the system and be in there. I'm not one of them. I know that's why I went down this path, because I don't have that capacity to be that adaptable or that flexible, I think. And I think one of the things, and I agree with you about all the adaptability and flexibility, but we also have to be strong and be able to say, you know, this is a moment where this should not be going down this road. And I'll give a little, I want to give 2 little examples. One is of someone who was leading a professional development workshop, very learned person, knowledgeable. It was for artists. And he was great. He's a great speaker. And he said, okay, so here's something you need to do with your children when they're working on a project. You need to stop and check in with them and ask them why they're doing what they're doing. And if they can't tell you why, it means they aren't understanding. Are there any artists in the room? they're not understanding what they're doing because they can't say why. Okay, now I have a choice. As a person in that room taking the workshop, I can say, all right, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I'll just like live through the rest of this and I become a cynic and I'm not going to be there anymore. Or I could say, oh, maybe I should be doing that. Maybe I should be asking my students why, and I should question whether they understand what they're doing. But there's a deeper part of me, which is the artist that knows that's not true about my art. And I have an opportunity now to say, which I did, excuse me, can I ask you a question? And that's something artists do. We ask these questions, and we live in the contradictions, and we live in the struggle. And I think that is another thing that we embody for our students to say, this is a struggle. I don't know where this is going, but let's just stay in that struggle together. And so to this professional, I said, do you happen to know the work of Henry Schaefer Simmer, who wrote a book called The Unfolding of Artistic Activity, which I learned through the book that I mentioned before, which is Teaching as Performing Art. 1948, incredible study of visual arts of all these different groups of people and how they made their art. And it is an unfolding process, which this guy who wrote this incredible book pointed out that if you go inside somebody's process when they are in the midst of making art and you ask them to explain it, to say why they are doing it, to rationalize it, to put it in a conceptual framework, not only may they not know how to say why they're doing what they're doing, but you may be crushing something that will take a long time to come back again. And you need to think really carefully about which of these educational modes, which may work beautifully in some other context, but in this context, are you just going to blanketly say it's good for education and so it's good for the artistic process? I think that's one of those assumptions we need to check. And when you feel that little meter in yourself going, I don't know if that's what I believe, to be able to respectfully, calmly, having done your homework, say, I want you to check that. Because I have an experience that's different from that, and also there's literature that supports that. And this person, who is such an excellent facilitator, immediately said, I don't know that book. What is that book? Wrote down the title. We got into a discussion about what does this mean? He has to rethink what he's telling us. The other thing about working with classroom teachers, because I have done that as well, I must not assume that they don't have the artistic spark sitting there waiting to pop out in a responsive moment. And my short, I hope, example of that is a teacher in Queens in the ELL classroom, English language learners classroom. Mm-hmm. We were to do a 10-week project. We could design it. It was to deal with this English language learner thing. Our first 2 meetings, she was called out by the principal, so we got only half of our time. In the beginning of the 3rd meeting, called her out again. She came back 15 minutes later. She walked in the door, climbed up the bookcase, grabbed the clock off of the wall, put it on the table, and said, I feel like that thing runs my mind. There was this pause, and I said, shall the unit be time? And she lit up. She was on fire. It was like, yes, it will be time. And we designed something together that was this launch that neither of us have ever done before. I went back to Arts Connection, which the project was for, and my colleagues at Arts Connection all said, you can't do that. It's too big. And I said, that's where we are going. And if you don't think that 4th graders know a whole lot about time, and it didn't take preparing them weeks and weeks, I mean, it was day 1, what do you know about time? And we launched into this really extraordinary place. But that was trusting her and her trusting me and finding that place together. And it didn't mean I had to adapt in ways that were not conducive to a real artistic, when you talk about being authentic. And I have to be solid in that. I have to feel confident in that. And yes, I got to bend, but I also have to be strong in saying, this is art we're talking about. And there is learning inside art. But we have to give it the space that it deserves to really learn from it and from each other.
Yeah, I feel like I like the direction this is going. I feel like we're heading into this place of sort of the practicality of it too. Like we've taken it from these goals into these very real situations. And I know that in sort of leading up to this discussion, I received some emails from people that are in that struggle. I forgot how you just said it, Jessica, but living in the struggle of having to negotiate all these different people in the room, different pressures and different things going on. So I guess I just want to sort of consciously insert that or notice that that's come into the conversation already. This, along with context, then we come into the practicality of actually having to negotiate these things and work our way through them. I'm curious if people in the audience want to jump into the discussion. I want to open it up so that it can really be a conversation among different individuals.
I'd love to hear some of your experiences.
How do you compete with words to a climate that is just so pressured for explanation? And how do you navigate? And I think artists or creative people need to be, I think we need to develop a stronger language that might help teachers explain when they are enlivened by it, and then they get gobbled back up into the word world, and how they can spew out words that make sense to, let's say, higher people. And is there a vocabulary that then itself won't become set? I mean, we use artistry. I mean, the word "every child is born an artist" is loaded. So, is every child born creative? And so, as you bandy these words around, not to say bandy, but as you discuss this, I just find that we really need to get our act together as artists and teachers in how we communicate and try to include with words that are understood from our point of view.
I'll speak a little bit to that. I think one thing is we have to take the power to put a pause. And I think that's part of the accelerated time we're in, that we feel like we can't just say, let's just pause here. What do we mean by that word? How do we define that? What are some other words that get closer to it? So that's one thing, is just making space for us to reflect on the language and whether it's speaking to us. And we'll choose different terms. We identify ourselves differently. But to find out, is that how you identify yourself, or how would you like to describe it? And that takes time and space. But I wanted, there's a quote that I happened upon, a woman named Cecilia Roos, who is a professor of interpretation. Isn't that a cool title? Professor of interpretation at the, it's at this Dance and Circus Academy in Stockholm. But she said, language is a very useful process in its ability to make distinctions between things. Movement is a very useful process for its ability to help question those distinctions. And I found that fascinating. And there is this thing of trusting in the not word and what you learn from that, and then to come back in and re-examine and question your words. And do new ones come up? And can we use many words to define? Or do we need to not define something at that moment?
I don't know if I'm talking to the same, what you asked, but this idea, but this is relating to what you said about now say why. Mm. And then I'm just curious, I thought it was interesting how you talked about this pressure of language and words, and then saying that we need to find the language and words. But because we teach varying ages too, there is something about getting the room to know that we're going to do something without our words. And I've gotten to watch Jules teach. Jules says, like, I invite you to, keep it on the inside. This is an expressive form, or that I try sometimes, once we know this routine of a warm-up, I don't cue them verbally so that so they're like in the lesson as the facilitator, can there be time without words? And even allowing, like, do you feel changed, or do you feel different, and not just like notice that, or, this is a conversation, but I think there's something about using dance as a form, and that we are saying that there's these ways of communicating and talking and validating and expressing and create without saying, this is what I'm doing, this is why I'm doing it, this is called this is called this. So I do think it has to be in that moment too of the actual lesson, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's really talking to what you were saying, but I feel just to add that about language and what you were saying with the professional development person being like, and say why, and this, but I don't know if that, I mean, this is really open to start just talking.
I think there's like that funny thing too about, I'm totally with you guys, but then I think in the field, like part of why I wanted to do this is because we're so rarely in a room together. And if we're not in the room together, then how do we communicate? And it ends up being through words, and that ends up being these sort of like institutional documents that come out. And it's not that that's bad, but then like, so how do we share our practices with each other? You know, because that's a really valuable piece of the puzzle that's not necessarily getting shared as much as all these other ideas are. Like the language ideas are so much more present in the field than the actual practices.
Wait, can you say that again?
Sure.
The language,
The language is so much more present in the field.
Than the practices?
Yeah,
is that
now
what
I
you just
want to
said?
question it. The language is more easily shared, or more often shared than the actual practices.
You mean the language
of what we're doing. Yeah, like even right now, like here we are sitting in a circle talking, as opposed to like, you know, we're not following Jules around the room, being frogs.
I'm really impressed by everybody's statement about why you do what you do, and I don't want to bring us down or anything, but I have a lot of friends who work for Arts Connection Studio and School, Lincoln Center Institute, Guggenheim, and all these places who are going through profound identity crises. And so I think, Lynn, where you can find a way to, okay, I'm going to be a regular kind of teacher, find a real role in a real school, maybe you can define yourself. But, I think being a teaching artist is being an outsider. It is your strength. It is what you bring. You don't have to be there 5 days a week.
Yeah.
You don't have to deal with what happens after lunch. You don't have to deal with the kids who are late. You just deal with what's in front of you, and you can live to whatever extent your organization allows you to. You can be the outsider. In fact, I remember I was on a panel at National Educational Research, and Maxine Green was the respondent, and it was all about how do we make arts, in the center? How do we get into the center of the curriculum and become one of those academics? And she was the respondent, and she just stands up and says, "Why do you want to do that?" She said, "We're best at the margins. We live on the margins." She wrote a book by that title. We're best on the margins. And I was facilitating a panel at Arts Connection once where Sharon Dunn, who was the then head of arts for New York City, was extolling the ways teaching artists could get a teaching license in a shortcut way. This was sort of the height of the Annenberg stuff, and they were going to get everybody licenses. And there's about 150 people in the audience, and she goes on and on. Finally, I said, "How many people, just quick show of hands, would like a license?" Maybe 5 raised their hand. I mean, this is a choice. It's not that this is all I can do. It's like, no, I've made this choice, so I can be this outside person, so that I can go home and make my own stuff. So, I mean, all of these things sort of extol the importance of being the outsider. A new book just came out, which is too expensive probably for anyone here to buy. It's called The Hybrid Lives of Teaching Artists in Dance and Theater. Maybe you get your college library to buy it. But, you know, it really is about the joys of being an outsider. And so I'm just wondering how you are managing to take the pressures now from the organizations to become standardized and rubricized and everything else, and deal with the school and live the values that you guys so beautifully and clearly articulated. I just think it's getting harder all the time, and I don't know how to deal with it.
I'd just like to respond to one very, the insider-outsider role. What I cherish about my position is I am able to be both. I feel like I have all the advantages of an insider. I walk down the hallway on Monday or Tuesday at AMS, and they're like, "Hey, Mr. Brown. Hey, Mr. Brown. When are we going to Lincoln Center, Mr. Brown? Hey, what are we doing? Hey, Mr. Brown. Hey, Mr. Brown. Hey, da, 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 da." And I know them. I'm like, "Hey, how are you?" Da, 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 da. So but I'm not licensed. I don't follow the lesson. I don't have to write my lesson plans like the teachers do. I get to go in and I get to mess with things. I get to go. They've given me permission to go. See this nice stack of stuff? Oh, look what happened. So I cherish that. I'm able to be both on the inside and outside. And I don't know. And I'll just leave it at that. I feel very, very lucky. And the only reason I can do it is I've been able to maintain that. I haven't become one, I haven't fully become regiment. I've had to follow the regimentation of my fellow, because I do think of them as fellow teachers. I spend more time with them than I do with teaching aides. So I feel more a part of their community actually right now than I do with teaching aides. But yet I still feel on the inside. So. Okay, sorry.
I think this is one of my roles is to support you and other teaching artists who say, who's talking about this stuff? And to support people in questioning. I think that's the insidious thing that happens is we start silencing ourselves and saying, okay, all right, I'll just do that. I'll just check that box. I'll just do that. I can do that and still do my thing. And there is this little creepy thing that starts happening that you become cynical if you've checked too many boxes that you don't believe in or agree with. And so how do we support each other in finding ways to respectfully say, I think maybe we need to rethink this with an organization that's pushing you in a direction that's not supporting the artistic impulse for your students.
Yeah, I will say too that when I was thinking movement research, I feel very genuine about that because I think there are not a lot of institutions that would support a conversation among teaching artists from different organizations. And we were kind of talking about briefly that, I think we talked about city-centered as a PD, where people are coming from different places. And but I really can't, otherwise I feel like all the conversations are very driven by these institutions that have certain pressures in terms of how you're reporting and talking about what you're doing. So I feel that pressure too, like that. I think it relates to what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like all the major organizations in the city totally drunk the Kool-Aid. It's like, this is what we have to do to get in the schools. We will do it. Now you teaching artists have to write your lesson plan the way they have to write their lesson plan. Is anyone going to read it? No, not really, but we have to do this anyway. And as Jessica said, I think it is insidious and it makes you cynical, and it makes it harder to do what you do.
But if that's how you support yourself and that's how they get the funds, that's part of what you accept. And so how do it's a negotiation.
It's kind of like negotiating that classroom. It's like, well, so you're,
it's the balancing act. It's weird. I work for 3 organizations and they're very different in like what they ask of me and what they ask me to show or I don't know. And so because of that, I'm kind of okay. Because it feels like I'm not being, somehow I'm there, gosh, I don't know how to say this, but, there are the bigger institutions that are asking for certain documentation that I don't work for them all that much. And then the core stuff is a place where I feel very much autonomous and as an artist and supported that way. But in all of them, I do still feel that I'm treated as the artist and that my work in the schools is as an artist. And I think if that changed, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing.
So how do we listen to the people who aren't okay?
Yeah.
I mean, how do we hear them and how do we offer a voice?
Right, and to not get over documentation. Right. Or what does that mean to document, or what does that mean to, I struggle, like I think, like if you look at my notes even for tonight, like I'm just like this person and that's how I do my lesson plans. And then it's like, I do have to then figure out how to type it in a cohesive way because that's just not how I work or function. And so that is a struggle, but I don't know, I also signed up for that work. I feel conflicted about even, there is the person that hired me that said I have to do that. But I get what you're saying, but how do we keep it at a balance that it doesn't become, I was saying about Diana, how we can bring it back to us as artists, but I feel like it's the same conversation we have as like choreographers and dancers about like presenting ourselves and the admin that we have to do in the grant writing, and like when that becomes too much and the artistic voice isn't there, like I feel like it's the same conversation in a way. I don't have the answer to it.
I think what I'm going to say pretty much is balancing off, and also the question you asked before. It's a balancing act, and I think it's that missing language that, as far as the arts, the actual movement, what people get out of it, being in the audience and seeing something that moved them, we can't explain it on paper. And unfortunately, we sometimes are that middle act as teaching artists or anything else that you're doing because of the funding, which is great, but sometimes not. There's a bigger value on that compared to the arts. It's like if we come to a performance and we see a great performance, and then someone else sees that performance, but they see it under a still video, you're not going to get the same thing. Totally different quality. It wasn't meant to be on video. So I think that's the problem, the problem or not, I guess, depending on who's looking at it. But as a teaching artist, I think the value is put more on the words compared to the actual art. Like I've worked at schools where it's all about the curriculum. And unfortunately, when you see the end product, the actual art, there's nothing there compared to private schools where I've gone, and they don't need a curriculum, but because they trust you as artists and you keep getting hired by them, you see that end product, which is enormous. What you get out of it, the kids see it, the staff see it, the parents see it. So it's always a win-lose situation. And for me, it has to do with the value of, unfortunately, the writing. So if there's another language, the arts is a language, but if there's a language that we can kind of, I don't know, it's hard to find for the funders, because I'm an expressive person. Like, I don't like writing. Yes, I love writing when I'm all in my head, writing my poetry or writing my art, but sometimes even when I'm doing choreography or designing a piece, it's like you said before, and you ask me what is it about, I can't explain it because it's clearly there, so it's we all learn different, and I think that's also part of our goal and why we're here as teaching artists. When we go into the schools and have kids that quote unquote have a learning disability, but that may not be the fact, they just learn a different way.
I had a thought a little while earlier when you were talking about the others. the lack of teaching artists talking about this. And I mean, I haven't been in New York that long, I've been doing this so long, but also wondered about, like, you know, I see you actually quite often, I see you often too, and it's like, but we always come together in different contexts, where the primary thing one talks about is not your teaching profession, because it is what supports us in doing this other thing. That, do we value that more? Do we prioritize that more? Like, it is what, you know, it's what we support. So we choose to write a curriculum and write our lesson plans because it is what supports us. And I don't know, and I often question that relationship that I have to, right, I go into these schools I teach, I leave again, I'm done. And then I go, and then I go to my rehearsals where, you know, again, I go teach so I can go to these rehearsals. And we don't talk about, like, when, you know, we don't talk about that, because when we see each other, that is primary in a way. And for me, like, what does that mean? That it is just this thing that supports me? Like, what is my relationship to that then? Like, even I want to create nurture and respect for all these kids, but, you know, I know it's like that is what supports this other thing that I care actually more about, like, because by saying that supports me doing that already creates this dynamic. And the fact that we don't ever talk about this, even though we see each other all the time. Sure, we work for all different organizations, and we all maybe know that some of us also do this thing next to this other thing that we share more openly together and have more conversations about. I don't know.
And that's part of why I just appreciate this happening, because I think being a teaching artist can be a really isolating, lonely thing. In that you're surrounded by your students and the school community all the time, but not necessarily other teaching artists. So it's really like the ratio is off. And so it's really great to get together and talk about it.
Yes, curious, like, do you prioritize do you feel like the teaching supports your other stuff? Like, or is it actually like, I don't know, like, maybe it goes up and down, right? I mean, it's a balancing act. And it's just
I found myself now on that end of the spectrum where but for years and years, I felt like my teaching artist work did feed into my creative work, and my creative work obviously fed my teaching artist. It was a two-way street, but for years and years, teaching wasn't my priority.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I don't think that's totally okay.
Yeah, but I think the curiosity that we don't talk about that, because for most people it is like.
I was gonna say, I think it's a personal journey in terms of when it's separate and when it's more cohesive, and I think in terms of like this maybe movement research community, like our shared experience, and we talk about our shared experience is dance class and dance performances and rehearsal. So that's what we're gonna talk about. I don't ever feel, that I'm not being asked about that. People that I do share those experiences with do tend to talk about those things, but I do know, I can only speak for myself, but I've had my own personal journey with it, that it's something I've been doing my whole time in New York, and for me it's been a complete balancing act. It still is. And I've gone back and forth of doing less and doing more, and picking up waitressing and not doing as much, and that idea, but in the past like 4 or 5 years, I think it always has, but I'm much more verbal, that I think they're totally tied to me as an artist when I think about the skills that I bring into the room as a collaborator and performer, and also because I'm very project-based as a dancer. But I do feel, and I don't know if this is right or this is just my own mental thing about it, but I felt like when I was younger and teaching, when people found out I taught, I felt like they thought I was not dancing anymore. And now I don't feel that. Like now there's like an interest. There's like more of an interest now, which I don't know if it's just me embracing the world that I live in. Like that's why I can only speak for myself, but I do feel like that for me, there's been this like switch, and I don't know if maybe I compartmentalized it and it was a stigma in terms of what you're even talking about. Like, no, I have to, I don't even know if it's my own personal journey or if it is a change of climate and like economy and that everyone now knows that we're all doing different things, but I have nothing really to end on. That was just
I feel like there's also something about like the space issue. Like, yeah, we see each other at class. Like, when I go into a school to teach, I don't see anyone else.
yeah.
Except for Ruby. But like, yeah, there's something about that. Like, I don't even know. I'm always surprised when I find out that people are teachers because I don't even know that they teach. And then it comes up and I'm like, oh wait, tell me what you're doing. No, really, I want to actually hear about what you're doing.
Within the organizations, how much intersection or collaboration is there between the teaching artists? Or are there other teaching artists in here? I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are.
I'll go really quick, but like I work at, like in terms of class planning and stuff and the bigger work, like
or even just like talking to them about teaching practices or like what it's like.
Yeah, I mean the smaller organizations where we see each other more, there's more.
Yeah.
And then the bigger organizations, it's when they like officially bring us together. But there's more meetings if they can handle that in that sense. And then one organization, we actually do all the planning and brainstorming together. So there's a lot of like exchange.
Can you say what organizations you work for?
So I work for Lincoln Center Education, the Park Avenue Armory, and Brooklyn Arts Exchange. So it's like, I feel like
Just mean Brooklyn Arts Exchange is the small one.
yeah,
But it's over here. It's over
But
here.
it's pretty big, and we are actually trying to open our professional development
They're
up
awesome.
to many. This is actually a new thing, but we are trying to open up our practices and professional development open to the public. So we're having 3 public workshops coming up in February, March, and April.
And she
There's
has
That's just
flyers.
awesome. That's just
so we are actually trying to do exactly what you're saying in terms of having more of a conversation about
The organization that I worked for almost 30 years, Arts Connection, which still exists, and I have not worked for them for the last 5 years because I've been working in higher ed and working at Hunter College. But we had regular teaching artists coming together, learning from each other, which meant learning paper making, and it's all artists, so dance, music, theater, visual art, everything. And for me, and I don't know how it's changed in the last 5 years, I think it has somewhat, but for me, those were some of the richest experiences during my year, were coming together with people, dancing together, making music together, making art together, doing theater together, and talking about what are we excited about, what are we struggling with in our art of teaching. So that's Arts Connection, and I think they feel the same pressure as everybody else. When I started with them, I was traveling around to schools, co-teaching with all of these different artists in different forms doing our art forms. So I would go out with a West African or Afro-Caribbean or Chinese folk dance or flamenco, and we would teach these workshops together that were mixing these things, which was really rich and exciting. I think that doesn't happen so much anymore.
I'm on 2 teams at Lincoln Center. One is full-time and one is charter. So I meet with each group about once a month, and we are getting back to much more experiential exchanges. We got very administrative there for a while, but we're shedding that skin, thank God. So it's going to be much more experiential, trading of practice, leading of activities.
And just to add on, like that is the most learning that I've done is watching from doing the lessons with my fellow teaching artists, watching their classes, observing, talk. I mean, that's when I feel like I've learned so much.
To learn from all of us. But so now I work at Bax, but in a more limited way than I used to, and now I work half-time at an independent school. So I meet a lot with other dance teachers, but it's more like informal, and I like they're my cohort, and we talk. And but the PDs that Donna has organized through Bax have been like tremendously helpful places to get together and talk. When I worked for nonprofits in public schools, I never felt like it was enough time together to do that sharing and that experiential like mentoring of each other. it was more, it'd be like twice a year.
That's the world I live in, like the public school or nonprofit at the public school type of model, and it's totally on the margins. Like the teaching artists come in for an hour and a half, which is usually just like maybe like an hour of actual teaching time, and then they leave. So there's not that much of a sense of community between the teaching artists. So I'm just curious to know the other models so that I can like try to bring it to wherever I am.
I have to say an exciting model at the Park Avenue Armory, we're all interdisciplinary. And we all meet together, and they have an intern program there called Youth Corps, and so there's 16 teenagers. So we will demo our lessons with them, and they give us feedback, and we go into the high school. So it's like the most enriching experience, because not only am I seeing my fellow teaching artists and we're talking, but we're also with young people, and maybe not all 16 of them are there, but there's usually some representation, and I think that's an incredible model.
And I would encourage you to do exactly as you're doing, which is finding out like what works and taking it back. And sometimes that's exactly what happened at Arts Connection. There's a number of times where teaching artists would say, could we have another one of those things? And they'd say, we can't afford to pay anybody. And the person who asked for it said, well, can you send out a thing that asks, will people show up if we don't get paid for this one? And we did, because people wanted it. And so having the desire and having some idea of some structures for how it would be a useful thing, not just a whining time, but something that is productive, I think. You know, it's what you said before about imagination. You know, Maxine Green's, if you can imagine it, you can make it happen, you can change it.
And then for me, I'm at Abrams Art Center, part of Hermitage Settlement, community works, and then I freelance at a private school executive fellowship. And through actually the Abrams Art Center, one of the schools where I've been for about 7 years now, I teach at District 75, special needs, which is at Park West, P138. As far as their workshops, it's usually, I would say for both organizations, usually right before you start the season or your curriculums, you know, for curriculum building. That's usually the connection. Abrams Arts Center is changing with the engagement and the arts, changing their philosophies. You know, there's new people now. So as far as teaching artists collaborating and even having different classes together and getting things up, it's a process. It just depends on the organization.
You said that you also work at a public school,
Yes.
and do you have to create your lesson plans in accordance to the New York core curriculum standards? Do you have to do that?
Yeah, with the blueprint.
No, I don't. I just recently got to know about this. I'm not from New York, but is this something that you have to do as a teaching artist in a public school? Like, is this a standardized?
Yes, well, for me, I mean, pretty much standard, correct, with using some of the blueprint. You have to do your lesson plans and curriculum, and then you have to use some of the actual blueprint as well. Some of the bulletproof as far as what you're teaching, what the kids are gonna learn. It depends on the not-for-profit also that's hiring you, what the grant is for, but most of the times for the public schools, they always want the blueprint.
Did you ever ask what they do with it?
Well, I would love to know. No, I think I'm I'm the trouble one, because I'm always giving, you know, a lot of, because I'm all about the art, but you know, after a while, I feel like there's also, I think for teaching artists and depending on, you have to, it's like having a repertoire. Obviously, you have to start somewhere, you have to keep building on it. You can't just scratch it and then start from scratch again, and scratch it and start from scratch if you're teaching at least the basis of a certain art. So that's where I come in with like the funding. I don't get with certain organizations. I understand you have to change things, but when you like have to change everything, it's just like, what do you want me to teach?
I know that this is the exception. It's the exception in my experience as well. But I have had a teacher look at look ahead of time at a plan, and I've identified a couple of things that I think maybe are related to Common Core. And they've kept an eye out during the lesson as they facilitate with me. They keep an eye out about, well, how are the kids receiving this? Do I see evidence that they've got their heads wrapped around it? What can I do with this to move it forward? Because it serves their teaching. And it is used, but I can't pretend that's commonplace, but it does happen, and it's something that's the kind of collaboration I'm trying to encourage.
Well, that's right. So where you recognize the meaningfulness of something and you can give yourself over to it when it has an actual application and somebody recognizes the meaningfulness of it. And I think my question is just about, that was the question Barry mentioned earlier, that when I was asked to fill in the little boxes and check off what happened to me, and this is just me and who I am, but that little meter of, I'm going to start hating this, and this is what I love. And I actually love the idea of assessing, because that's part of teaching, that you're assessing what's happening. That's part of responsiveness. But if I'm told, do this, and also nobody's ever going to look at it, then you just gave me busy work that I spent time doing that I have to do in order to get the paycheck. And it starts me as a little self-sabotage. So in those situations, if you can do that and it doesn't bother you, that's great. If it does, then you can find alternates, which I did. I created my own form. That's how sick I am. I mean, really, it took a lot of time that nobody else had to spend, but for me to say, you know what would be meaningful? How about I give you a list of the kinds of questions I ask children, the kinds of questions children ask me, the kinds of questions classroom teachers ask me, and then I'll give you a sketch of what happens usually in the first 4 weeks, and then maybe in the next 4 weeks, and then maybe in the next 4 weeks, so you can see what the arc is of what I do. But if you want me to tell you that on day 5, we are absolutely doing this, and I sign my name to this saying I really believe that, I'm just one of those people that's just gonna go, and I don't wanna do it anymore. So, but when I offered that, and I said, I will do this work, and I'll give it to you in a form that you can read and understand, and maybe somebody will read it. And if they don't, and they stick it in a drawer, it doesn't hurt me because it was meaningful to me in making it. And so to me, that's.
And assisted your teaching.
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
Yeah.
there is something about the lesson plans that assist in our teaching.
And so what are you, how are you using this? How are you engaging in a dialogue with someone? How are you saying, look, if I can't put the thing in the right boxes,
Yeah.
is there an alternative?
But I love what Lynn was talking about too, of this idea of if you're stuck, if you're feeling frustrated in an organization or like what they're asking you to notice, or, I don't have an education degree in terms of knowing all the language around it. This idea of if you have a partnership, with the teacher or the principal or the parent coordinator or whatever, and you could have someone be observing your class and they're watching you and they're like writing down those key things, like then the assessment and that kind of language is happening and you get to still be the artist. So I do think there could be ways of like getting around it, and maybe you do that for a couple of times and then you understand it and you can just do it on your own. I don't know, but I think there's lots of, exactly what you said, like there are lots of ways to kind of work the system in a sense that you can stay true to what you know and what you know best. Like, you want me in the studio being an artist on my other time, because that's what makes me the teaching artist that I am, rather than taking that education course to know about these certain language of the system that I'm not a part of. I know that's an ideal thing, but I do think, it's about relationships and finding that partnership person that could help, whether it's in your not-for-profit or whether it's in the school, I think could be, like this is giving me an idea. I was like, I never thought of that.
Yeah, I will say for movement research, I end up doing that for a lot of the teaching artists, is I'll go watch them teach and then sit with them and be like, okay, this is what you're doing and these are the standards that you're addressing. And then we use that to talk to the teachers sometimes, because sometimes the teachers will check out while the teaching artist is there, and if we're like, oh, they're doing like the create strand and anchor number 2, the teachers are like, oh, what? Like, I get that now, I understand it. So, and then I think it does feed back into the artist practice. So It's funny, in some ways, like, I think we're talking about being outsiders to the system, but I think we actually are like part of the system too, in a really rich, wonderful way.
You know, how common, in my public school, there was no dance, we barely had like gym. Is this a thing that is in most schools or, you know?
I think dance is the hardest one largely because of space. I think that most schools can't support space, but the word on the street, and you guys can correct me, the undercurrent that I hear is that there's, de Blasio, there's a big push to make schools more accountable to the art standards that a lot of them have been kind of skipping by and not actually fulfilling what they're supposed to be doing. So it'll be interesting in the next couple of years.
The chancellor now, Carmen Farina, is a huge art supporter from way back, and so that's, you know, an indicator of some interest in building the arts.
But I was just gonna say, I think a small percentage overall of New York City elementary schools have either a full-time dance teacher or a dance teaching artist. And if they have a dance teaching artist, it might be for 1 or 2 grades, usually below grade 2. So I mean, you're thinking about like the percentage of schools, I can't quote it now,
Danielle, do you know?
but I would be very surprised if it was more than 10%.
I also think that, and I may be wrong in this, but this Lincoln Center Scholars Program, are you involved in?
I know about it.
I know about it.
They have quoted that they were going to put 200 and some odd dance educators in schools that do not have dance educators now. So they're making jobs happen. I'm not sure I agree in the way they're making it happen, but they're funded for this. So that's going on. So there is something happening, and the more artists we get into the schools. You know, the de Blasio's plan doesn't necessarily mean dance. I mean, it's art, so it could be art, it could be music, it could be theater. It's not necessarily dance. I was really struck by something, Donna, that you said about I signed up. This is what I signed up for, and I thought that was a really great statement. You know, you knew what you were signing up for. We all do, and if you accept that and you go with it, then it's fine. I mean, my dream is that we change the face of dance education in the public schools so that you can be teaching artists and you don't have to follow their rules and check those boxes. I mean, that would be a wonderful dream, and maybe it starts here. I don't know.
And to add to that, because I just wanted to say something that Jessica said, like, as much as I'm going to be adaptable and flexible to certain things, like there is going to be a moment where I'm going to stand up because it's an art form I believe in, and like sometimes I have to remind the school that's incredibly supportive of me to be like, to be supportive of dance, it needs the space, and if you keep bumping me out of space, and even though I'm here all year round, you know, like there is a moment of speaking up, and there's a moment of flexibility and adaptability, and I think it's the same thing with like these forms where they're asking. There's a level of what we expect, and then there's like what is getting ridiculous or what is getting more. And I do think having the voice to speak up to that, or have alternatives, or have other options, is important as well. But
I think some teachers who are teaching 8 classes a day in a public school situation where they get sucked under their artistry, get sucked out of them because of the situation. I mean, that to me is criminal. And that, you know, the support for those people, I think, is lacking. And
They barely have funding. Like one of the schools where at MS or IS, they changed it a couple times. 131 at Esther, her name is Margaret Plaza. She's been teaching there for years, and it's a lot, over 200 something kids, just her herself. And I mean, she doesn't get the funding for, you know, the end of the year shows. And she also has special needs class. She doesn't get nothing. Everything has to be raised between her and students, you know, fundraisers with chocolates and just asking money. Now she's actually trying to, because of course as teaching artists, we want to also leave the Board of Ed and think of, you know, where else to go, and she wants to be a director. So she's also doing this new thing, I think in May, where she's collaborating with other schools that are coming, you know, from Connecticut, acquiring, and she's trying to do this big show outside at Permit de Soto Vélez, which she has to raise like $17,000. But again, the struggle, there's no funding for the people who are actually in the Board of Ed, you know, because they get sucked in, and the art form is not necessarily the art form that they want to do.
That reminds me of another resource that I think is in short supply, and that's time. That there's so much emphasis in the system right now about collaborating, and it's so important that the team meet. But you know, they're always being pulled out to go do the special inquiry thing or do this and that and that. And if we could be part of the solution of figuring out a way to help these people talk together with us or with each other, but the need for time to collaborate. My experience is that they so badly want to collaborate. They really do. There's no time. There's no time to
Well, there's
talk.
time, but we're doing different things with the time. So the time is not made for this particular goal.
That's right. Right. Well, yeah. But I'm also seeing it in terms of, their ability to even talk with each other.
Yeah. It hasn't been structured.
It hasn't been
allow
structured.
that.
Big obstacle.
Well, I'm excited to see what happens with these new programs and this funding for arts in schools, and to see how that balances out with sort of the artistry that we have in this room and are supporting each other. I'm watching the clock a little bit, and I know the elevator is going to stop running in 13 minutes. Is that right? So I want to wrap up so that if you need to run, get the elevator, you can. But we'll also be here for a minute if anyone wants to continue talking or has individual things they want to come say. Thanks. And I definitely want to thank the 5 of you guys so much. This was so wonderful to have all your minds and you here.
Thank you.
Thank you.